I'm ready to slash and burn.
No border. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And this is one of the many roundtables that I am doing. I'm very excited for this one. It's such a great group of folks on this particular show. This one is on design and influence and inspiration, which, as we all know, are some of the very vital building blocks of combat robotics. So really excited, and welcome back everyone to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So first of all, I'm just going to go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves. One of our panel members is on here audio only, so I'm going to start with Kyle. So please, Kyle, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Kyle Kuffrey. I am the owner and operator of Maximum Effort Robotics. We do robotics kits in the ant weight class. We have one that is four-wheel drive vert. It's heavily Hypershock inspired, called Synthwave. There are a bunch of them running around the country. Then we have a mid-cutter named Fred that my daughter designed. Which is pretty cool, pretty hard-hitting, a little scarier than the one I designed. I've been doing robot combat for about 3 years now. Now we have events about twice a year in Chattanooga called Maximum Mayhem that we host as well.
Very cool. Greg.
Forgot I was muted. There we go. My name is Craig Danby. I build Slammo on BattleBots, and I'm also Peter's illegitimate son.
Have to call the lawyers.
Nik.
Hey, I'm Nik Buchholz from Team Bloodsport. I do a lot of the weapon design. I've been doing robot combat for about 7 years in various different weight classes. And I like horizontal spinners.
That is very apparent. Alex.
I'm Alex Pezza. I'm on Team Shreddit with Shreddit Bro, and I'm just an all-around grease monkey, I guess. Bang on it and everything. And then I'm also one half of Wake and Bake with Angel Vidal and Yes Chef.
Very cool. Will.
Hi, my name's Will Bales. I built Hypershock. I'm one of Peter's legitimate children. Craig and I are siblings.
Naturally.
I have so many children now.
Once the bot daddy, always the bot daddy.
It'd be half siblings, wouldn't it?
No,
I guess you're right. Oh, I'm just a legitimate one.
Pete.
Hi, I'm Peter Abrahamson, aka the Bot Whisperer on BattleBots. Oh God, bad matter.
There you go.
I've been involved in robot combat since 1994 with the very first robot wars in the United States, and all the BattleBots and Sawsbots, and then stopped building and competing, and have been behind the scenes as well as in front of the camera on the reboot of the show for the past 7 seasons.
Wonderful. Well, I am so excited to have all of you and talk about this topic. I wouldn't say that, depending on the very specific issue, that design or influence is typically a hot topic, although I think that in this past season with World Championship 7, there may have been some things that have come up with design and influence and things like that, which actually leads me to my first question. And I think it's great to have Kyle here, who has designed something inspired by another robot, because that first question really is that when it comes to design and inspiration, is there a line? Because I know that I've talked to certain builders who have flat out said, if somebody designed a robot that was completely exactly part for part the same as my robot, I don't care. There's other people that would care if somebody, designed something based off of their robot or very similar to it. And I'm just curious to get all of your thoughts and opinions of what you think about that. Is it a compliment that somebody designed something that's similar to something that you've done, or is there some point where there's a line that shouldn't be crossed there? So I'll actually start with Will, although I'm sure that in this particular case, I would think that you're probably flattered, that somebody
Absolutely.
would.
Yeah. Like everybody else, this is a passion project. This is a hobby on steroids. So, we put our hearts and souls into what we're building. And I don't think I've ever personally encountered anybody taking an aspect of design or anything about one of the robots I built and turning it into a bad thing. I think it's awesome that people like Hypershock at all. All the bad decisions that had to take place in order to make it possible and for everyone to see it and everyone to enjoy it. That was the goal, was to make something fun to watch and fun to make. And so if other people get to enjoy and the joy of making it as well, then that's a win.
Yeah, 100%. And Kyle, I'm curious to hear like your side of that, the process of saying, hey, this robot is awesome and I really want to design something inspired by that. What was your, what drew you to Hypershock to want to build something that had that inspiration?
Yeah. I've watched since the earliest days of Comedy Central, and I know that there are people like us that get just absolutely elbows deep in everything combat robots. But a lot of the people that build come at it from a very utilitarian approach. And when I went in, I wanted to come up with something that was both. It worked well and it was exciting, but it was also exciting to look at, and it got people who wouldn't necessarily be the first to jump in and look at a plain silver box. They could say, hey, that thing looks awesome. It's neon, it's bright, it's exciting, it's fast. And that's what Will designed in Hypershock. And I said that I think that would do a really great job getting people interested in getting the entry-level people into the sport. I've noticed that it seems to be one that draws a crowd. And so I think that that's something that we need as a sport. And I think that's something that is a good idea to port over to something to draw newcomers in. That was my approach, was let's take an exciting idea that garners a lot of attention and do a spin on it, which hopefully isn't exactly the same to the point of being a direct copy, but definitely has that excitement behind it. And I think we've hit that. We try to.
For sure. And Alex, being part of Team Shreddit, I know that when the smaller version of Shreddit Bro first came to NHRL, and I'm sure Evan could probably speak a little bit better to this, but you being on the team, that's a robot that a lot of people were like, hey, that thing is so good and I want to build something like that. So, I'm curious, from being part of that team, what your thoughts are there.
It's interesting to be kind of part of the growth of the FingerTech beater bar, because I grabbed onto it pretty early on as well. So the first time I saw it was on BattleBots. There's a robot called K2. It was a 4-wheel drive vert, and it won the first season of BattleBots. So people were like, "Oh, wow, that's cool." And that was the first time I ever saw it, and I was still dabbling, getting my feet wet in the sport because I was an adult, and I still loved combat robotics. I remember seeing it when I was like 8 for the first time on Comedy Central. Been a fan of it for over 20 years. And then I realized I had adult money, and I found out there were local smaller competitions. So I started to build ant weight, and then COVID happened. So over COVID, I was doing research and I found out about Norwalk, and then I found out about Shreddit Bro, and they advertised the FingerTech beater bar, and he was doing work with it. So I knew as an entry person, you could build a robot that at least will get good hits out of it. And it's just a tanky system to start out with. Where am I going with this? You know what I mean? It's just interesting. So like, as a person in the sport and you're new and you didn't go to school to be an engineer and you're not into it or anything, you see something like that. The weapon system on a robot, I think, is the most intimidating part for someone who's new to the sport. The fingertip, that bar made it accessible. So seeing that, it's, yeah, you got to follow design, but you don't have to stick to that formula to build a successful robot off of that platform. Because now if you look into NHRL or any smaller weight classes, that fingertech beater bar that Evan had that started it all for Shreddit Bro, there's 4-wheel drive versions of it. There's some kid online, I'm not sure what his name is, he's building a version of Thagomizer, which is a whip bot with a fingertech beater bar. So the only thing that stops you from building is your mindset. You could do anything. I don't know if that's what you wanted.
That was great, Alex. Nik, Peter, Craig, if any of you want to jump in on this one.
Yeah, it's like Kyle said, what I'm always looking at in this kind of thing is like, what is the spin that you put on it? You know, like taking inspiration from different robots is great, because that's the only real data point you have when you're designing a robot is other robots. And so when I'm looking at like a robot that's been inspired by other ones, I see it as like a continual chain of like yes and like, oh yes, you did this cool thing, here's what I'm going to add to it. And that's a way that a lot of people are able to be creative with different ideas.
So I've been on both sides of copying somebody, like straight up outright, like I do have here with my tiny little light I built.
No, you could buy those at Target.
Not like this, baby. That's all brushed. And I've been on the other side where my robot was straight up copied and taken to a different TV show. There are two different sides to it. So I'm good buddies with Will, and I steal basically all of his drive elements. So I've basically got the exact same drive in Slammo. So I think taking elements, learning from them and stuff like that, that's reasonable. I think back in like, was it 2017 or something, I posted a CAD of what I wanted to do, and somebody took that CAD and took it to a different TV show and got paid to do it. That to me was the line. You know, I built the original version of that for like £500, and it took a lot of like effort to get it to the point where it was good enough to go on TV, and then somebody else got $15,000 to go build a copy. So where the line is, if different people will draw it in different ways, but you shouldn't be getting paid to do somebody else's work.
Good point. Good point, Craig. I went to art school. I'm not an engineer by trade. Well, I'm an engineer by trade now. Like I basically do mechanical design, but I went to art school first. And I'm sort of always been in this mix between whether it is truly form follows function or functioning following form, because, you know, having my teammate being Mark Satrakian through many of the years of building, form was key, right? But then there was a huge amount of function he embedded into all of that. Like he tied them well together. And my first big robot I was inspired by an old World War I tank, the Mark IV, the parallelogram of that shape and its treads. And so when I built Ronin, let's see if I can get it to not disappear. There's a little bit of it. You know, I was thinking of lots of different ways that I wanted this to do, and I wanted it to be able to have suspension so it could kind of move separately. Tread pods can move independently. I wanted all the motors in the tread pod. Ronin was never a good winning robot. Like, screw that. But it made a great toy. And that was sort of like part of my thinking was I wanted a visual object more than I wanted a winning object. I knew if I wanted a winning object, I probably could have made a really nice aluminum box with a wedge on it, and I probably could have won. But I was way more interested in building something that looked cool. So that was how I got to that point of form and function, and Ronin being, I don't know if it is more form than it is function, because it wasn't the best robot, but people remember it. And that's, in a way, I felt it did its job, is it inspired people to go do other things. And there isn't other than Red Devil, who did a way better job of building Ronin than I ever did. Like, that was a copy of my robot, but brilliantly done. And I was honored to see it roll into BattleBots.
Yeah, to Nick's point, the yes and part.
Yes.
Take the aspects of this and then do something new with it. Like Hypershock, a 4-wheel drive vertical spinner, spoiler alert, is not a novel idea. The spinner, the 2-disc on a hub thing, we stole that from the middleweight version of Witch Doctor. It just seemed cool, and Dissector had big exposed wheels, and that looked cool, and I liked Dissector as a kid, so let's go with big exposed wheels. And we wanted to put little arms on the front, kind of dissectory. But yeah, it's the making it your own bit that especially on the scale of the TV shows, that's where you make it your own and okay, still on the right side of the line. Yeah, kind of to Craig's point, I'm happy to let anyone who's brave or foolish enough to look at the inside of Hypershock and try to copy it. By all means, go for it. It's an open book, because there's a lot of learning in it that took us a while, and I'd much rather people have better fights, better shows, better content, better entertainment as a result of our suffering. So that's totally cool. But like Craig was also saying, if you're these shows by their nature, not everyone can get on them. If someone went to Norwalk and built an exact Shreddit Bro clone, it wouldn't prohibit Team Shreddit from competing with Shreddit Bro. It's just it's an additional one in the field. The restriction of the TV show requiring casting and it being a finite field, when you have someone who comes up with a novel idea, or is working on something unique, or is, like, for example, we think Thagomizer is super cool and it would be great as a heavyweight, and we talked about it, and then we're like, oh man, he's probably going to want to build it himself, and we didn't want to take it away from him because we feel like jerks if someone came up with all this new concept, developed it on the smaller scale, and before they got the opportunity to do it, some jerk with more money swung in and did it themselves, and so their opportunity to get on the show and shine and get the credit they deserve was taken away from them. So that's
wouldn't that be a shame?
Yeah. that's the trick.
Yeah.
Get your
that's a great point.
application. Get your applications in early.
There's a group of guys in Ohio who are, they're doing that Thagomizer thing pretty well. So we'll see how that goes. How do you feel about the potential of AI designing robots?
It's gonna take a while.
If they could do it, let's see how they do it. I mean, we all know how complicated and difficult it is, and I do not think we are at the point of AIs replicating and designing robots. Maybe visually they may come up with some sketch of something, of jamming Tombstone and Hypershock and Witch Doctor all together as one giant mishmash of robot, but the idea of them actually designing the robot and the interior, I don't think we're anywhere near that. They're so far away.
We'll get there one day, deep out in the future. But yeah, we're not there yet. I've been trying. Lord knows I've been trying. If I could put off all that work, it'd be so great.
They're going to need fingers to cut. I mean, come on. Like, how are they going to be able to build without cutting their own fingers?
I'm just going to say it's one step away from the Terminator movies, and I think it's a bad idea. James Cameron made these movies to warn us. So I think AI designing robots that are meant to fight, probably a bad move.
I think we could reasonably see
This is how
AI
Skynet
designing like individual parts, like plug it into CAD and tell it to make a single part. It's like generative design on steroids kind of thing. Like Chat GPT does generative design, but like to do the whole system architecture of a robot, like I think you're gonna have many years of it like trying to put your motor like halfway through your structural members and like just like jumbling everything into nonsense before you're actually going to get to like any kind of executable product.
I mean, right now, AI needs so many photos of cats, puppies, and ducks to be able to identify them. How many robots exist that are actually have their full CAD available for something to use as a library? No. Like we are so far away from that ever happening. I'm not too worried.
That is good.
Well, once we get there, there's still the innovation. You can only duplicate what already exists.
Yeah. Once it starts thinking for itself, though, I don't know. We might have a Skynet situation. So hopefully not too soon. We'll hold off on that a little bit. But the next question that I have is, so a big topic, I would say, over the last couple of seasons of BattleBots, probably more geared towards that than the smaller bots, is some of these design aspects, and like at some point does it go too far? So forks being one of the big hot topics, is that it seems like there's forks and there's this goalpost for like what that is, and then everybody has to try and like make that goalpost go a little bit further to kind of keep up with everyone else. I guess my question is, at some point, does that kind of goalpost design aspect go too far, and does it actually like hurt the design once it gets to that point where it's gone too far?
I would
Absolutely.
say forks hit their wall already. Like I think Endgame's last season was a perfect example of over designing forks.
Yes. Endgame ripperoni is like when do forks go too far? Like that's where they went too far.
When forks go wrong.
And then Copperhead removing all of them, right? I mean, there's always the rock, paper, scissors to every robot, but there was just the evolution of a bird on Hawaiian Island to eat a flower has to develop this super long beak to be able to get into that special flower. If that flower disappears, that bird becomes useless. So same kind of thing with like the forks got so long to a point that it actually hindered the ability to be a decent combat robot. So walk it back some.
I also think more people are starting to figure out how to kind of overcome that. Like Copperhead and Minotaur have both gotten really good at smiting forks with their drums, and you have different designs coming out that are designed to like either whack off forks or like take advantage of mobility and get around them, or you see like a Hydra Ribot situation where like drivers are just no longer falling for driving onto Jake's flipper. Like he has to actually drive forward, which is something that he struggles to do. So like strategy evolves to counter these ideas as they get more and more ridiculous, and that kind of provides a natural beat back for something like fork meta.
I think if you look at the final from this past year, I mean, that kind of proves the point to an extent too, where you have absolutely no ground game involved in the World Championship final. I think it may have reached its max, or we're just going to see robots developing around the fork meta like huge, and the Sawblaze can control the ground game. It's not all they have. It's not their only trick.
Yeah, for sure. Now, when we're talking about metas, I mean, given the way that this past season went, where there was just such an insane amount of meta breaking, and seeing these designs that have maybe not done as well in the past, having really good seasons, whether they went far in the tournament or not. Does that change the way that everybody has to think about their own design? And, does a team, well, I mean, obviously a team with modular design is going to have some advantages, but are we going to see more teams thinking that way? Because you really have to make those adjustments for every opponent that you have.
I don't think it matters, because Copperhead's a perfect example. There's one Copperhead. But like, having a modular bot and having the ability to change it up on the fly to fight your opponent is great, and that's fantastic and everything. But it's not all you need for a successful robot. And you're talking about a meta. Everyone knows it's a 4-wheel drive vert. That's the meta in BattleBots. And you put a plow on the front that can handle horizontal hits. You put forks so you can get underneath the other guy. And like, so those designs are going to develop year after year, but it's not going to develop as fast as someone who has a unique idea, who's has one thing going for him. So for Huge, it was height, and he rebuilt all his motors. The weapon spun up faster. He had more torque so he could drive around quicker. And Huge became a problem because everything on the robot that he wanted it to do finally was working for him. And then you have robots, but they stumble. We all know the last couple of years, Jonathan Schultz unfortunately had a couple rough seasons the last couple of years, but the same could be said this year for Mammoth. Mammoth decided to do a radical change to some of the components on his robot, and they failed in the box. And I'm sure Mammoth that comes back next year, all of those are going to be ironed out, and we might see a Mammoth we haven't seen in 2 or 3 years. The sport, unfortunately for the heavyweights, they don't get to develop as fast as some of the smaller weight classes, but the smaller weight classes are testing grounds for all of these builders. Everybody knows about Megatron. Jameson Go runs Megatron 6-7 events a year. And there's things on Megatron, I've talked to him, that go on to Sawblades for the next season of BattleBots. There's a lot of things the builders can do in this day of age to kind of stay ahead of it, driving practice and all of it.
Elaborating on that, Alex, you make a really interesting point that so many of the teams, the vast majority of teams, are so focused on the meta and combating the meta and prioritizing all their resources and energy, their time development on combating the meta, because that's the majority of their opponents. And then Huge and Sawblaze come along, and everyone has to come up with their Huge configuration. Everyone has to come up with their Sawblaze configuration, which, as we all learn slowly but surely, they don't work because Sawblaze go through everything. But it's these robots that are refining themselves to a very high execution level and high reliability and just high performance that are sniping through everybody on their way to the finals.
Reliability wins more fights than anything else. If you've got a reliable robot with a competent driver, it will win more fights than anything else. Doesn't matter what the meta is, doesn't matter what configuration they're going for. I actually think being able to configure your robot, I think that is going away. I think people, as Will says, I think people are going to start honing in what they've got. It's certainly been something that we've started to do with our robots. Slammo has got rid of the upper arms because they were too slow. And what we found in the last season was people were getting away too quickly. You learn that by going to events and trying it. But we actually saw it on the fairy weight version where people were getting away. I went to go pick somebody up and he got away because he was too quick. And I was like, well, what do we do? And it comes back to what Alex was saying about going to the smaller events and developing it. And it's a specific path that I have decided to take, in that I've got a 150 gram, I've got a 1 pound, I've got a 3 pound, and I've got a 30 pound on the way version of the same bot that I run at Proving Grounds currently. They're almost all completely identical. And the reason for that is that incremental design changes are what make your robot better and better and better. And the fact that I've got a robot that is finished and is going to Proving Grounds, I can make those little adjustments to make it better along the way. So there are places for heavyweights to go play. It's just super expensive to get there if you're on, and even worse if you're out in England. So
Yeah, I love configuring all kinds of different, options on Bloodsport, like especially the blades. I talk about that ad nauseum and stuff, and optimizing all the different factors for different opponents and stuff. And as much crazy strategizing as I love to do and thinking through every different opponent, like somehow when push comes to shove, we always just seem to end up back at the classic bar, because like it's a known quantity and it works, and the robot is proven with it, and all the other ones have different variables, and we get to the test box before a match and we find like, oh, this one struggles to self-right, or that one like is too heavy to spin up, or all these different factors. And when you run in with the known quantity, it's a lot easier to execute your plan. Like everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And the moment something unexpected happens that you didn't account for, that's your punch in the face moment, where you're no longer, in the realm of what you anticipated. So the more variables you can lock down and just say like, I'm leaving this alone, this is the known working version of my robot, like the more effective you can be.
and I just say I love your bar designs. I think your bar designs are terrific. I really love that big disc one with all of the teeth on it as well. Just
Oh, thank you.
put that out.
Keeps from the top of his robot from being hit by over-swinging hammers. It's perfect.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Pete, if you have any additional thoughts that haven't already been said.
Similar to what Craig had said, which is reliability and confidence in your robot. I always sort of say that Matt Vasquez is one of the best drivers out there. And the reason why is because he's very confident in that Whiplash is going to do what he commands it to do. Now, this last season was not his best season. Whiplash was definitely having internal problems and being difficult. But you go back to the season where he made it to the finals to fight Endgame, was one of his best seasons, and he was just commanding in that, like just took control because he totally trusted that the bot was going to do what he needed to do when he needed to do it. And that goes into the reliability factor that Craig was talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Now I did want to make sure that I get in my one question that was submitted from Alex Crease, even though we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but I think, maybe there's more to add to it. But what factors contribute to the evolution and competitiveness of different bot types over time? And why do you think those factors contribute to that?
Who wants to jump in first on this?
I'll
one?
start.
This is
I'll start
definitely
with
an
this one.
evolution.
I'll start with this coming as someone who's like relatively a new builder, like 3.5 years into this, actively competing with no knowledge going into it. I still don't know how to use CAD. I'm learning right now. I build everything with hand tools. So it's like YouTube's a great resource. There's forums, there's Facebook groups, there's Discords you could join. You just ask questions. But it's all the people that you meet in the sport that can influence. Like there's going to be outside forces, things that you love, the job you do, robots that influence you, obviously. But a lot of the things that make your robot better is you go into a fight, you fight a dude, his robot hits yours, you go flying away, and after the fight, you go, "What motor are you using to run your weapon?" And he tells you, and you go, "That's awesome." Or you ask about batteries, or you ask about a material, or some type of brand of controller they use. And you start to build this knowledge on all these really niche things from the sport that you could use, and that creates your identity because you find things you like that certain people don't like. So that's part of it, at least I think, at the beginning.
Yeah, I just want to build off that. Like when you're going into robot fighting, and you mentioned like, not having like an engineering education and all that, like robot fighting is so different from any other engineering application. Like even going in with like a bunch of years of high school robotics experience, I thought like, oh yeah, this will be easy compared to what I did before. No, like it's so far removed from anything sensible that like the only data points you have to go off of are other combat robots in terms of like, you know, what motors did they use that don't explode immediately? What ESCs do they use? What materials do they use that hold up? And like the only way you can know any of those questions is just to look at robots that are successful fighting, because they test these things out, and a lot of people have been through the trial and error and, oh, I tried this and it didn't work. And I think there's also a lot of value too in learning about that experimentation that people have done, because then you can take and say, well, here's this idea somebody had that didn't work, and here's how I can maybe change it to a different application and maybe run with it and make something out of it that works in a different way. And I think a lot of new ideas are born out of that too, just running with, you know, failed experiments that other people have done and given up on.
Yeah, I think that the sport is unique in that every growth, every new development in the sport is nearly 100% community driven. It's, I have an idea, I saw somebody else do a thing, I'm going to try that now. Like Will mentioned the whole diagomizer, minimizer, maximizer trend, and I saw one of those as an ant weight, I think a year and a half ago, the first one I ever saw, and then they're everywhere now. And they're doing well because somebody saw, hey, here's an idea. I'm going to yes and elaborate on that idea. I think if I use this new motor that, I don't know, Peter Garnache put out, I'm going to put that in one, and it'll do even better. And it's just community building on community building on community to make these advancements. And the next cool thing comes up and we do it again.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Certainly from my perspective back in the day, robot development would happen because of what happened in the arena. So in the period between Robot Wars disappearing in England and Robot Wars coming back, you had a really, really healthy live scene, which is still going today. And we would fight like twice a month kind of thing with heavyweights. And I went from a robot that barely worked to a robot that finished top 3. It was years of development. It was lots of like, oh, that broke, change that. That material is no good, go to a different material. The way we've assembled that is terrible. Let's do it a different way. That was worse. Let's go back to the other way and just weld it. You can't weld. Let's learn how to weld. So there's lots of incremental learning that you can do. It's not something that you can do now because BattleBots is like 2 weeks of hell. It's like
Preach.
the way I describe it to my motorsport friends is like if you take the entire NASCAR season and you condense it into 2 weeks where you race every other day, and you've got to fix the car after every single race. That's what BattleBots is. It's an entire season crammed into 2 weeks, and you can only take what you've got, and you can only learn what happens at BattleBots. 2021, we fought Will, and the robot got wrecked in the first fight. Not, you know, it's okay, Will, I've forgiven you.
I'm sorry, baby.
But what we learned from that was the material that we'd gone to was unworkable in the pits, so we couldn't fix the material that we had, because you couldn't drill it, you couldn't weld it, you had to weld it underwater, which is what I did. I welded it in a big water bucket because you couldn't weld it. It would get too hot, and it would, yeah, anyway, so there's a whole thing. So those are the kind of, like, if you make a big mistake like that, like we did in 2021, that early in your design process, you're screwed at BattleBots. And so when they were like, hey, do you want another fight? I was like, no. No, I don't. So the way of learning for me has always been getting into the arena and doing something, which is why I do proving rounds so often, because it's better for me, because that's the way that I learn. I'm very much like a hands-on, let's do this kind of thing. Even at work, I like to break things before I figure out, oh, let's not do it that way, let's do it this way so it doesn't break. Sorry, boss. So that's just the way I learn. And I think once you go through what Alex had been talking about earlier, where, hey, how do you do this? And you learn from kind of like experience of being in the pits, you get the experience of being in the arena. So you'll figure out like a set list of these motors for drive, this for my weapon, this for my armor, this is how I set it up, this is how I build it. And then you've got to incrementally make those things a little bit better. So that's the way that I've always done it. And that's probably why I've not developed very well over the last 5 years, because I don't get in the arena very much.
Pete, anything to add?
I'm going to step back and go a little more theoretical and a little further back about evolution and environment. The flat floor defines much of what we do now, of almost all robots. So you have a couple of choices you get to make. Is Sir Isaac Newton your friend and your vertical spinner so that all forces go through you into the floor? Or is he your enemy and you're horizontal and it knocks you flying as equal and opposite forces knock you around the arena? And like, how well can you grip that floor? So we've seen magnets, we've seen things. So like huge was the big meta breaker, because it was, how do I get out of the space that everybody has been confined into by that the flat floor and the ground game has defined? And so they broke out by going, fuck it, there is no ground game. We're going to go giant and be above everybody. You know, but can we, how much more massive breaks can we make in the meta with a flat floor? I know that there's many angry conversations about the shelf, and Trey was attempting to sort of break some of that by adding an obstacle. It may not be the right obstacle, but it was in the process of attempting to change the environment so that evolution has to counter and go with it. And that was sort of the idea. So that's sort of, like I said, I'm stepping way back out and looking at it from a much bigger perspective.
Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, in the past, I wouldn't have really had much to add to this myself, because, you know, there was definitely a point in time where I was like, I'm never making a robot. That's not something that I know how to do. That's not something that I'm good at. But I would conceive of what I thought, you know, I would want to do if I ever did make a robot. And it took actually getting out there and driving one myself to say, no, this is actually the way that I would want it to be, to kind of play to what I feel are my strengths. So I think there's a lot, whether it be iterating on a robot that you already have or iterating on this idea of a design, you know, that the environment can influence. So yeah.
I was going to say, and a perfect example of that is the difference between NHRL and BattleBots. In BattleBots, to stick on the floor, people started adding magnets. In NHRL, they made cleats because it was a wood floor, changed the whole process. So there, you know, those were great sort of breakouts into that evolution of that environment and that space that was required.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big question that I have is to just, you know, name either a person or people that really inspired you when you first, you know, started getting into building robots. I mean, I want to say I think Kyle's answer is obvious, but Kyle, if you have anything more to add on that particular question.
Well, I obviously Will and Hypershock were a big inspiration. I followed a route when I first started building. My first robot was actually a take on Robert Cowan's Sergeant Cuddles. I don't know if anybody watched his build video. Excellent video. I did build a two-wheel drum spinner as my first robot ever. One of my first inspirations to get into it, honestly, I'm going to say was Gage Couchois with Vlad the Impaler. Amazing robot, super simple, but just drove it like unbelievably well. I think that there are a number of different inspirations. Obviously, currently, Hypershock is the most beautiful bot I've seen, and I'll die on that hill.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Whoever wants to go next.
I'll chime in. So I would name Mark DeWitz and Paul Ventimiglia for me. Like when I first started out watching, like Icewave versus Razorback was the first match I ever saw, and that got me hooked. And obviously I'm a big Icewave fanboy, building all my little overhead spinners, and then I went deeper down the rabbit hole, and I found like Brutality and Green Wave and some of Paul's old robots. And when I was building this bot, Phantom 2, the big design like inspiration was to take that like overhead archetype and add 2016 Bite Force like exposed rear wheels to drive upside down. And it's had mixed success, but like the concept of just taking this like idea that worked for one type of robot and trying to mesh it with another type of robot that a lot of people had seen as like kind of outdated at that point that I built this bot. Like I thought that was a really cool way to try to mesh different designs together and make something new.
For me, when it came down to building my first robot, I had a FingerTech beater bar, and the meta for that design at the time was a symmetrical, like little crossbar on the front, so the bar wouldn't hit the ground on either side, wheel guards, and they were either white or black because that was the UHMW available. So I'm a sous chef by trade, so I know that half-inch cutting board that's kitchen grade is pretty strong, and people talk about using that. So I made my robot yellow, blue wheels. I gave it it has like a dragster slant, so it sits like this. Back wheels are way too high off the ground, but put the weapon closer to the ground. So I got so with the same weapon motor as all these other beater bars, I started getting better weapon engagement. So for that, it was inspiration, but for me, the thing that it's like any wacky idea for me. If you see something or you hear somebody, I think those are the best things that you could bring to the table. Like someone at one of the events said one of the robots was thrown apart, and they said, "Oh man, you should just throw that together and hold it together with zip ties." So I built a robot that's exclusively held together with zip ties, called Zip Tied, and it has erupted in both of its fights in glorious hits, and each one contained like 130 zip ties. Stuff like that, small stuff. The Be Careful What You Wish For bots. I've the Be Careful What You Wish For line. They're robots that are made from websites like Wish, the motors, everything. They all cost me like $150. They're really cheap. One of them ended up going 3 minutes against Silent Spring with Jameson Go. Anything's possible. Just whatever you can dream, just do it.
Follow your dreams. Hell yeah.
Let's go.
We should have a whole division of those. Sounds fantastic.
I love Zip Tied, by the way. One of my
you.
favorite bots at NHRL. So
it has the best knockout, I think, of any of my robots that I've ever competed with. Smee driver, can't remember his name.
Joe Fabiani.
Joe Fabiani, yes. I should know his name. Joe Fabiani at the event that I brought Zip Tied first to built a robot that was a crusher. It was like a 3-pound worm gear driven crusher. And since Zip Tied was held together with zip ties, the top plates for 1/8 polycarbonate. So it went through my top plate, missed all of my electronics, and the tip finished going through my robot and had just enough space to push down the button on my ESC and reflash it from inside the robot while it was on and turn it off. So that's the greatest knockout I have. And as a builder, everyone's going to think that's funny, and normal people are like, what? But yeah, I had to reflash it after the fight for my next one.
That's awesome.
And put a little teeny cover over that switch from here on out.
Yeah.
Once it's flashed, you can just desolder it. You just get rid of it completely.
There you go.
So back in the day when I was getting started, it was people like Peter and Mark that were the inspiration. I remember seeing the master go the swinging backwards and forwards, and I was absolutely in love with it. But yeah, as much as I love that, I was really inspired by people like by Carlo and Greg and Trey with La Machine. The epic battle that you have between La Machine and Biohazard was just it was the inspirational point for me. It's like, I want to do that. I remember sitting down as a kid going, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing that. And lo and behold, I have. But that was like the initial inspiration. And then you see what other people are doing. You see like what Will's doing with like, he's got really great branding of his robot. And someone like Nik is putting out really terrific robots as well. Like Bloodsport blades are absolutely terrific. And my brother is builds an overhead spinner called Apex, which everybody should know about, but let's not talk about it for too much. He's actually put it through. We've tuned the bar, so we know that the note that the bar will make when it spins, so that it sounds like an Apache helicopter. We're as close to that sound as possible. There's a video of it online somewhere. I'll find it.
That's sick.
It's amazing. It's probably just going to self-destruct the first thing it hits, but it's going to be amazing. It's a glass cannon. But seeing what other people are doing is the inspiration now. I love the way that Will Browns. I love the bars that you're doing, Nik. Like Bloodsport generally, I think Bloodsport's a pretty good robot. It's one of those like underrated designs, I think, where people kind of overlook what you've done a little bit, but inside, like Bloodsport's pretty fantastic.
Well, they established themselves too quickly.
That's the problem. You would spend 20 years as like the 53rd robot, 50 bots, and just sit below the radar, and then just come up with a robot with a bright pink mohawk and a giant googly eye that lights up. That's what you've got to do. And that's my plan. But more to what Pete said earlier, my whole point of building robots now, and it has been since Robot Wars came back in 2016, is to get a toy. I want a toy of one of my robots. I don't care which one. That's why Foxic looked like it did. It was completely suboptimal in its design. That's why Slammo looks the way it looks now with its mohawk and its googly eye. I want a toy. Hexbug, you come on. You've spoken so many times in your toy.
Greg, I don't know if you've heard, but it's no longer Hexbug.
But we'll come back to that.
We'll have to talk about it. Different topic. Toys, merchandising, a whole different topic. For me, it's like, I mean, the most influential robotically for me has always been my teammate. It's always been Mark Satrakian. Like he's always been miles ahead in design and thought process. And to have been able to sit next to him and be with him and sort of say, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and him to go, why don't you try to add a little bit of this into it? And you'd be like, holy crap, I didn't think about that, and run back to the CAD and start adjusting for some of those concepts. But yeah, Mark has, going all the way back to the first Master, to the second version of the Master, to the Snake, to Mechadon, to Axis, moving the nut, to now with Stalker, the 5. I mean, he's just always on the cutting edge in a level of design and thought that to me always blows me away. And I try to emulate whenever possible.
It's down to you, Will.
All right. Like Craig said, and like Peter said, Mark Satrakian, of course. I watched the show as a little kid on Comedy Central. I was fortunate enough that Team Loki was local to me. In fact, my dad worked with them. They were coworkers. There were a whole bunch of kids that were in a first robotics team that he had mentored, who then went to FIU for college, for engineering, and started doing BattleBots while they were at FIU, and then ultimately got hired building rockets with my dad. And then they were still building robots. So I thought that Trimangle and Buddy Lee Don't Play in the Street and Turbo and Ramstein were just the best. And I have a picture of like a 8-year-old birthday party where I'm sitting on top of Ramstein. It was just the coolest thing. My first robot, though, was a clone of Ziggo. I thought that was it Jonathan Ritter? I love Ziggo. It was awesome. It had great fights. It was a lightweight robot, so it threw itself all over the arena. So I made a 15-pound robot called Heiferbot. It was covered in black and white duct tape, looked like cow spots. My mom helped us make some uniforms, very first branding. So they were, looked like cow spots all over our shirts. Went to the mall. Remember malls? Went to the mall and there was a kiosk that had like an embroidery station, so you get a hat embroidered with Heiferbot on it. And we won our first fight against a turtle. It was literally like a turtle shell with a robot underneath it, and I lost the second fight because I forgot to charge the transmitter. And after that, I was hooked. But going into later robots, it was like Pete with Team Cosmos, who built Solaris and some incredible 12, 15, 30-pound robots, 3-pounders in the early 2000s. All the robots that Peter made, all the robots that Mark Strakian made, all the mutant robots that Donald Hudson designed, and all of that kind of coalesced into trying to make the coolest robot I ever could every time I was building a robot. And now we're here.
Very cool. And I just have to throw out there, even though at some point she's probably going to get tired of like how many times I say how awesome she is. But I mean, for me, it was Lisa Winter. I was in my early 20s watching BattleBots back in the Comedy Central days. And I don't think we'd be having this conversation right now if it wasn't for Lisa being there and me seeing her and being like, what? Like she's doing this? This is the coolest thing that I've ever seen. And I mean, that's really what drew me into BattleBots in the first place. So Tentamushi will always hold a place in my heart. So I have a few more questions, and then if anybody has anything to add after that. But the first of those is the thought of adding something into design that maybe isn't not necessarily not functional, but isn't impactful. So flamethrowers can be effective in certain situations, but I wouldn't say that I necessarily see so many times that they make the difference in the fight. Even though I love flamethrowers, I absolutely love them, and I want to make a bot with one someday. But when you think about any design aspect that is possibly more for show or just something that's more flashy, is it worth sacrificing weight in your bot that you could potentially use for something else to add something like that in there? Or do you think it's better to just focus on what is the most functional for you? So just curious to hear about that.
It would
Worth it.
It would definitely start with like, do you have the weight to do this? So if you've got the weight to do it, you can do it. Or if you've got the space for it, do you have the space for it? I'd love to put flamethrowers on Slammo. I pitched Slammo initially to Greg Munson with my feet picks, where I was like, oh, here it is with a flamethrower. And Will got that one.
That's how you get a priority treatment.
That's how you get in.
Pro tips include the feet picks.
If you want to get into BattleBots, you got to send Greg Munson feet picks.
You still have to get past me, but yeah.
Well, they gotta be tasteful.
Exactly.
This is off topic. Now, come on, we were talking about.
So, talking about that, I'm not going to talk about flamethrowers, but a good example of whether or not you have the weight or should you do a thing. One of the things I learned just a week ago with Will standing there looking inside of Hypershock is there's only about 2 right angles in it, and that's the wheels to the motor. The rest of everything is a shape. There is like, he's got no right angles in there, and that's a very specific hard design to do, but he went ahead and did it, and it's
because
what
it was
makes
fun.
Hypershock. And it's beautiful. It's what makes Hypershock so sexy. When you look at it, it's like, wow, look at all those shapes, because it's so intentionally done. And he worked so hard to get that to be inclusive to the structural, that that's the kind of thing that I see, that I look at, and I'm always amazed by.
Well, like Craig mentioned earlier, our goal was to get a toy from day one, season one. Get a toy. Okay, cool. We didn't do well enough to be considered for a toy. Then we didn't do well enough to be considered for a toy, and then we finally got to the point where we were actually going to get a toy, and just that one. And the timing worked out such that, surprise, surprise, Hypershock design hadn't started yet. This is going into season 6, and I actually didn't. I knew about the shelf before I started designing. That's how late we were in the game. So while everyone else is complaining about how awful the shelf is, we're like, oh, okay, cool. We'll design with the shelf in mind. But I was talking with the then Hexbug engineers, and they said, okay, you got CAD. I'm like, could I give you CAD of the latest one? Like, sure. You got it? Give me a minute. So over the course of a month, I gave them enough of CAD models of the Hypershock as I was building it, designing and figuring out what it was going to be. I gave them enough to, like, here are the proportions. Here's what the weapon's going to look like. Here's what the armor's going to look like. And I knew the whole time, this is the last chance I'm going to get at designing a Hypershock for a toy. So it had to be perfect. And so I put all this extra effort into making everything else swoopy. And it worked out. But the Hexbug designers actually had a Hexbug version of Hypershock before I had a Hypershock version of Hypershock. And he's like, those horns are a little flimsy. You might want to thicken them up. And I said, no, it'll be fine. And then P1 happened. But we got the toy, and that's all that matters.
Does anyone have any other thoughts on flamethrowers or the like?
Oh yeah, the point is, make cool stuff. Who cares if it's going to be competitive? Endgame's going to be more competitive you than no matter what you do. So you do something fun while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, flamethrowers are killer in the 3-pound class when you can just, melt the other robot. But like what we do with Bloodsport is we just like torture the poor machinists that have to make our chassis and just make this like really horrible shape that has like all these different contours in it. And it's like not even all that bad, but just like the size of this billet that has to then be contoured all around the edge, and it's like trapezoid shaped and stuff is like, if anyone who knows machining will look at it and cry. And that's like the goal, is to just like, here's this really odd looking shape that we can just cram, into the ZTL quoting engine and like yeah,
it's your robot is powered by machinist tears. Like, I mean, come on, that's the best.
Yeah, and Proto Labs, they're good sports about the whole thing, but it's a good time to test the limits of what we can do.
I think that this is the wrong sport for pure efficiency on design. I think if we were all that interested in efficiency, we wouldn't be building toys to destroy constantly. I think that, if you have a fun thing, put it in there. That's the whole point. Make weight for it if you need to. Who needs armor?
Yeah, it's BattleBots. You can't forget to have fun.
That's what big is for.
Nobody needs armor. It's fine. Yeah, and actually it's a good segue into the last question that I have, because some of you have touched on that a little bit, but people have different goals when they design. Some people design to win, some people design to learn, some people design just to push different boundaries. And I'm just curious, like, for each of you, what has that goal looked like for you? Has it always been the same, or has that like kind of evolved over time? So Kyle, I'll go ahead and start with you. With kind of working on the ants and with Synthwave.
It started with a design idea. obviously. There were some parameters what I wanted it to look like. And I think that you have to some extent, if you want to continue on with at least like a name legacy of a bot, you have to kind of stay inside those design parameters as far as what it looks like. And then but once you have that then comes the fun part. I like to take something that isn't necessarily initially designed to be the most competitive, and then within those parameters, make it most competitive can be. That's my fun zone there, is taking something and saying, okay, yeah, I can make it a tiny wheel, 4-wheel drive with a giant weapon, and make it out of CNC'd aluminum and probably crush people. But it's more fun to make something fun and then make it crush people.
Yeah. Craig.
I always start out wanting to win it. And then I remember how much fun I have like messing around. So with the latest version of Slammo, I was just like, I just want a robot that is fun. And I like it it looks fun. It drives like ass, but it's fun where it drives around like weirdly and stuff like that. I don't do destructive weapons because I don't trust myself, quite frankly. So I'm quite happy with my forky lifty boy. I enjoy the sport a lot more when I just do it because I like it. And if I do it because I feel like I have to, which is what happened when we got sponsors previously, it took away the fun. And when you take away the fun, you add in the suck. And when it sucks so hard, the robot then starts to suck. And like, I don't want to really do this anymore. And then I started mentoring my girls like a year or so ago. And I watched those girls learn how to build robots. And I watched them fall in love with building robots and go to competitions and be second at their very first competition and qualify for states and then qualify for worlds and then go win trophies at worlds. The bigger picture then becomes what your robot does for other people. And if I'm enjoying what I'm doing with my robot, which I am currently, it means something to somebody else, or it can mean something to somebody else. Somebody will look at my robot and see that it's black and pink and it's got a mohawk and it's got a big googly eye and think it's fun. Does it win? Probably not, quite frankly. It's currently unbeaten. Just want to throw that out there. That's because Will hasn't shown up yet. But
I'm not allowed to draw Hypershock anymore. You're fine. Well, actually, no, she'll probably beat you.
It's about having fun, and I'm at a point where I'm probably never going to win the giant nut, probably, quite frankly, and I'm probably not going to win trophies, quite frankly. But I might inspire somebody else to go do something, or I might help somebody along the way who will go do something, and that to me is like that's the goal. And so long as I'm enjoying doing it, that's why I'm still turning up.
Awesome. Nik.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place. Like I have obviously my style of robot that I like to build, and if I like to win, I would build not this, but I kind of try to like have a mix where it's like, I confine myself to this robot style, and then I try to make the absolute best version of it that's possible. And like with Bloodsport, the philosophy is the same. We take this flawed concept and we try to just like throw any amount of engineering and manufacturing effort at it that we can to optimize and make it Pete was talking about niches, like the bird with the long beak that goes and eats out of that one specific flower. Like if we can find the one niche and be the best example of that niche, like that is its own form of winning. And I would also say like there's kind of an underdog battle there too, which is fun, because it's like when you show up with an overhead horizontal like, and you fight like wedge verts and you know, kinds of stuff, like we're supposed to lose those fights. Like if you talk to anyone that knows like the rock paper scissors, like we should get beaten by all those verts, but it's like anytime we can make them really work to prove it, or like score a you know, a victory against the meta, like that's a personal victory that we can take home and say like, you know, we resisted, you know, the meta today, and you know, will we win the war? Probably not, but like winning the individual battles is fun.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Alex?
So all the robots I've designed, the first robot I ever went into a competition with was a beater bar called Yes Chef. It was built a little bit differently than the other ones. It was version 4 going into its first competition. Never fought, never hit anything. Did weapon tests safely with it. Drove it around in the street with no, you know what I mean. And I showed up, but I found out that I just really like driving. There's something about that when they do that countdown, it's like a drug. There's this adrenaline rush that goes through you right before the fight starts, because you know you're either about to cost someone a lot of money loss or you're about to lose a lot of money. And I like building. I want to build durable robots. I want people to know when they're gonna fight me, they're going the full 3 minutes, whether I'm winning or they're losing, and it's gonna be a great show. I like putting on shows. I like to build robots that can take a hit the ceiling, drive right back into your weapon, and hit the ceiling again, and do that for 3 minutes. It's a good fight. And I like to build robots that can do it to other people. Um, I'm a huge fan of the sport. I have been. I remember the first fight I saw when I was little. I've been addicted to it ever since. But the other thing with my robots, I like building bare bone robots. And when I say that, I generally don't run forks. I don't run wheel guards. I normally just the frame and then the wheel sticking out. And there's something about being able to take something like that against someone who's like, "Oh, I designed this wedge and these wheel guards," and then you basically see the junker car some guy built in his garage next to some team of racers on a drag strip, and you think there's no way that car is going to beat me down the track, and then you just pull it off. You just have a winner and a sleeper. I guess sleepers. I like to build sleepers. That's what I got.
Will.
Oh man, why do we keep doing this? So when BattleBots is finally around, the thing that gets me excited is it's a new design challenge, it's a new design prompt. Trying to one up myself, you know, like Nik said earlier, you know, how do you yes and yourself, the previous version of your own robot? How do you just iterate a little bit on it, make it fun, make it entertaining? I said at the beginning, this is a passion project, and it has to be fun for all of us. Otherwise, we're not going to do it anymore. So trying to find the joy in a new design, a new, you know, just problem solving, whatever little thing it is on the robot, trying to get the toy, you know, getting ready to get your butt kicked by Jameson again. That's what gets you to filming. And then afterwards, you're like, I'll never do this again. This is awful. And then you go to like a maker fair or a you know, some sort of public event, and some little kid comes up and says, I love BattleBots or whatever. And you say, what's your favorite robot? And they say Tombstone. I'm like, of course. But it's still like it's so wonderful to like sit there with a little kid who's excited, and you know, it's just like me when I was a little kid, excited about fighting robots. So like Craig said, being inspiring and entertaining to other people is what keeps bringing me back, and sticking with it, just because it's that in itself is fulfilling enough.
Very, very valid goal. And I mean, Pete, you've been doing this, I think, the longest of anybody. You know, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, what's
Except
wrong
for
with
Jason Brown? Jason Brown's the only one who's been doing it longer. So one of the things that I only recently sort of became consciously aware of. I mean, it was always there, but I wasn't really paying attention to. And it happened at one of those events with Will at it. There was a small child named Skylar who was about 3 years old, I think. And I knelt down to give him a Bot Whisperer pin. And I said, "Do you know who I am?" And he looked quizzically at me and I said, "I'm the Bot Whisperer on the TV show BattleBots." And he leapt into my arms, just like launched himself, hugged me, and held on. There was this realization of what we do affects people. And what we do not only just affects people, it affects them positively. We are changing people for the better because these people go on to become engineers. These people go on to build things and they change the world. And it really, like, that moment up there at Open Source, like, blew my mind that how much what we do affects people out there. And like I said, in a positive light. And it's super, that, like, just really exciting to know that we can keep doing that. We can keep making this sport go on and expand and make more engineers and make more creative people that want to just do something as fun as we do, which is break the crap out of our toys. Like, how much fun is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't think of a better way to sum that up. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of fans feel this way, but I can speak for myself that I think, every person on here, whether they realize that or not, has at some point, like, either inspired me or, shown me something that made me grow my love of the sport. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Really, I think everybody that I've ever had on this podcast has taught me something or, just had a positive effect in some way. So, yeah, I mean, it's just like, thank you to everyone in the community. It truly is, I think, the best community that I've ever been a part of. And I can say that wholeheartedly. So, does anybody have any final thoughts or input before we wrap up the show?
I've got 2 old Slammo chassis for sale if anybody wants them. I don't need them anymore.
Will, what did you just have there? Is that your feet? Are you going to bring your feet up and you're going to take photos?
Yeah,
of your
I
feet?
need to apply with a new robot.
Feet need to be in the photos. Yes.
Sometimes the direction that the show takes, I never really know.
It takes you to the truth is where it takes you.
It does. Well, I am truly thankful for everybody coming on and talking about this topic that I think is, so important, especially with so many new builders out there, people who have never built a robot that maybe were thinking about it, and that, like, your goal can be so many things, and I think the important thing is just to do it and kind of see where that takes you. But for everybody that's watching, of course, please continue to support combat robotics. It's just a wonderful thing and makes a difference to so many people, like everybody has said. Please make sure that you like, subscribe, all of that stuff. Keep watching the show because I have lots of plans to bring all sorts of wonderful content. So, keep following it. And if there's something that I haven't done or a guest that I haven't had on, please let me know. And I will always do my best to make that happen. But thank you to everyone, and we'll see everybody next time on the show.